Good afternoon, everyone. Let's go ahead and call the Salina City Planning Commission meeting for April 21st to order. Would you join me in the flag salute?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The next item is a moment for us to have celebrations and accomplishments, time for us to reflect and remind others of the things that are going on in Salina that make us happy to live in this particular town. Anybody have anything?
I do. I wanted to mention that at the spring spruce up this past Saturday, we had over 200 people that did a great job of doing various projects around Salina, and I got to work at the urban water demonstration site, which is south of Kenwood Cove, and it's a site that's being funded by EPA and supplemented by Greater Salina Community Foundation, where we are trimming the invasive species, and we put in a trail last Saturday. And then I wanted to commend the young 3 different youth groups that picked up trash, and they didn't really get they didn't get recognized in the paper. And right now, because we've done some trimming, the river is exposed and the trash is exposed, and that trash comes from what drained into the storm drains and then ended up, and so right now it's a reminder. We couldn't get down into the water to pick up that trash because it was so wet, but they picked up hundreds of pounds above the water, and so wanted to give kudos to the young people that did that.
Perfect.
Pick up trash.
Anyone else?
I just wanted to mention, I mentioned this once before, but I think it's really starting to show now. Not being part of the school district anymore, so I'm talking as a patron, but I'm excited to see some of the construction fences up and some of the contracts being issued on the numerous school projects, which will result in some pretty exciting things for our community school district when it's done. And you're going to see a lot of things happening pretty quick. But, you know, I have a couple grandchildren now, and I know they're going to be excited to think about having all-day kindergarten, which will be one of the outcomes of those construction projects.
Others? Well, I'm going to have one that's very similar to the water project, but as it's springtime, and if you don't have a chance to plant your own garden, or if you're wondering what you could plant in your garden, I would encourage you all to spend some time at the demonstration garden, just right across from the Kenwood Cove by the YMCA. You can see a lot of plants that are cool season type shade plants to plants that would very easily become xeriscape plants as well. So I encourage all of you to go there. It's a wonderful place to take a lunch. If you need to be outside and relax, it's a good place to be. If there aren't any others, let's go ahead and move on with the consent agenda. It's the approval of the minutes of the April 7th regular meeting. I hope you've all had a chance to peruse those and see if there's some additions and or changes that need to be made.
I would move that the minutes be approved as written.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. The minutes be approved. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? That motion carries. Item 5.1 is a public hearing on application CU 15-2, filed by the Salina Airport Authority on behalf of Cross Midwest Tire, requesting approval of a conditional use permit to allow a truck service and repair business in an I-1 Industrial Park zoning district. The subject property is legally described as Lot 4, Block 6 in the Schilling Subdivision, number 5 in the city of Salina, Saline County, Kansas, and is addressed as Units F and G at 2775 Arnold Avenue. Mr. Andrews.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Rogers may have some better background and history on this, but back in 1989 there was a building permit issued for what at the time was commonly known as the Business Incubator Building, and the concept was to construct a building which was 96 feet by 210 feet, and to provide units with low-cost, flexible space. The idea to provide space for startup businesses, and the original design had 7 tenant spaces, or what's known as units A through G. And then back in 1998, the Airport Authority initiated a massive replatting project, and their plan was to replat the entire former Schilling subdivision as it was handed over from the federal government to the city. And the particular subdivision for this area covers 477 acres. At the time, it involved 15 different property owners. It extends from the K-State Salina campus on the north to the Airport Industrial Center subdivision on the south, and from the Missouri Pacific Railroad tracks east of Schilling over to the runway apron. And this particular subdivision has 124 lots and 15 blocks, including Lot 4, Block 6, which you see highlighted there is the particular lot that we're talking about. And if you're familiar with the name, Cross Midwest Tire was formerly located at the northeast corner of Crawford and Broadway. That location is Zone C6, heavily commercial. They have left that location, and they've decided to focus their business solely on truck tire installation, service, and repair. And they've been looking at a number of locations around the city, and the Airport Authority Board recently approved a lease of units F and G in the Salina Development Center building, which is, again, at 2775 Arnold Avenue there, and that was to lease to Cross Midwest, understanding and contingent that it was on approval of a conditional use permit for the installation, service, and repair operations. So what we did was we kind of laid out two options in our response to the Airport Authority. Was that option A was if Cross Midwest wanted to limit themselves simply to having administrative offices, warehouse space, fleet parking, then those would be allowed as essentially an administrative office for their business. And under that model, all the work that they would do would be off-site, going to other locations to do any work, whether it was on the road or at a different business location. The option B operational model would allow those same activities, but also allow vehicle service bays for servicing trucks at this location, which means they'd be brought here for servicing. And that type of vehicle service and repair is a conditional use in I-1. And so an application was filed for this location, and we have the plan that is before you today. We also asked to clarify in the application whether Cross Midwest's planned operation would include servicing of tractor-trailer rigs. And so the application that was filed indicates that they want to be a tire service center for all types of commercial vehicles, including semi-trucks. And some of the equipment that they would have installed would include air compressors, wheel balancers, and tire machines. So your role today is first to determine whether this is a suitable location for truck service and repair business, and then to look at the proposed business operation and determine whether you think it would have negative impacts on the surrounding neighborhood. And so we have summarized for you the I-1 district and what distinguishes it from the I-2 and I-3 districts. The primary separation between I-1, I-2, and I-3 is that I-1 is more restrictive as to uses, and I-1 also requires paved surfacing, whereas I-2 and I-3 allow for all-weather surfacing with paving being optional. So as far as outdoor storage, that is permissible at this location because there's no non-industrial zone properties in the vicinity. There's a item 3 there, it says service and maintenance of vehicles shall be permitted only when such is necessary to the conduct of a permitted use. So obviously, if a conditional use permit is approved today, then that would be a permitted activity at this location. And our records show that the original building was built under I-2 development standards, and then later this became part of a larger I-1 zoned area. But in terms of looking at the welfare and convenience of the public, this is not a highly visible or next to the interstate location. However, it may be convenient for businesses located within the airport industrial center. The application does state that most of the vehicle service and repair will occur off-site. If we look at whether this use is consistent with adjacent uses, I think you have in your packets where those uses are labeled, but the Kansas Air National Guard has a facility here. This is a storage lot there. This is our subject property, and then the Kansas Air National Guard owns this property as well that's occasionally used for outdoor storage. So if we look at the adjoining property, it's all zoned either I-1 or I-2, and it's used for some industrial type use or vehicle and equipment storage. And as we pointed out, their application states that most of their repair will occur at customer locations, and they expect an average of 2 utility trucks per day and 2 semi-tractor trailers per week will be the norm. So if we were in an I-2 zone, we would not be here today because that is a permitted use there, but it is conditional in I-1. And as we indicate in our report, and you do have a supplemental handout at your places, but in looking at this, staff's primary concern was just whether the existing configuration is suitable to accommodate semi-trucks. And so what we did, and it may or may not be a fair comparison, and John, if you could put up the site plan for Petrolube. So this is a new facility that was for tire and lubrication that was put in on North 9th Street, and we worked with the designers and applicants, and their plan was they brought trucks in here, and then they were swung around, and these were the service bays here, and they were brought into the bays and then exited out through this driveway. And so we had requested and received from them that level of detail. This was their customer parking area, and this was their circulation plan for the trucks. So we requested some clarification on just the circulation pattern and function at this site, and you have at your places an 11 by 17 drawing that addresses that. As far as public utility service drainage, this is an existing building, and this use is not going to impact that. As far as traffic access and parking, Arnold Avenue is a collector street. We have a collector street pattern that connects up to Centennial here, and the collector street comes down, goes to Bailey, and back over to Centennial. But Schilling Road comes over to Arnold and then up to that site. So this is accessible by either arterial or collector streets. Sutherland is a local street, but there's segregated driveways here with the customer employee parking available front, and then the rear service area access there. The requirements that we apply to or have applied to other similar businesses is to provide 2 truck stacking spaces per service bay plus 1 parking space per employee. On a previous plan that we had reviewed by staff, we determined, and this needs to be clarified, that there would be 2 active service bays potentially for semis and 8 employees for a total of 8 parking spaces. The plan that we had in the packet did show you that there was the truck turning radii at the rear of the building to show that that area is large enough to accommodate tractor trailers. But some of the things we'd like to clarify at today's meeting would be whether there would be 2 active service bays or just 1, and where the proposed truck stacking spaces would be, a clear identification of where the employee parking areas would be, and then I think we asked the additional information about stacking and employee parking, and whether the tractor trailers would be serviced in the bays or parked outside and then the tires wheeled into the building. So hopefully those are things that we can clarify for you today. We have laid out 4 alternative actions. One would be to approve the request as submitted with the appropriate findings. You could approve the application with any conditions or revisions to the plan, and that one of those revisions could be exclusion of work on over-the-road semis at this location. If you don't think that the site is suitable for that, you could postpone consideration of the request if you feel like you need additional information, or you could deny the conditional use permit application altogether. So our recommendation was if based on the information provided by the applicant, the commission finds that the servicing of tractor trailer rigs can be accommodated here, then we would recommend approval of the application with 2 conditions and any additional conditions that you as commissioners might come up with. The first one, I think they've attempted to address with what you have at your places, which is a more detailed plan for stacking and parking. And then there's been previous communication from the fire marshal and building official about on-site bulk tire storage, and that second condition just deals with any such storage complying with the requirements that have been set out in the fire code and building code. And of course, a third alternative would be to approve the request but not allow for on-site servicing of tractor trailer rigs. John, if you could go to the findings of fact. So this is somewhat just taking the staff report and information provided and turning into findings that the board could make. But the I-1 district does allow truck service and repair. It's listed as it's permitted subject to a conditional use permit. The I-1 district has a more limited range of uses, which is why this is conditional and not permitted. This site complies with all the I-1 district requirements. As we look at this, the operation would meet all the use limitations of the I-1 district, and the conditions we have would require compliance with all fire code and building code requirements for storage of tires. As far as welfare and convenience of the public, this location would put this tenant space into active use, and it would provide a truck tire service available in a location that's convenient to airport, industrial center businesses. All the property we're adjacent to is I-1 or I-2, and the Kansas National Guard owns property on 2 sides. We don't have any residential in the vicinity, and based on the business model that's been put out with 2 utility trucks per day and perhaps 2 semi-tractor trailers per week, I don't think the scale or intensity of this business would be incompatible with the surrounding businesses. There are 15 marked spaces in front of the building and additional surfaced area in the rear. What we have laid out there for you in item 5 is that you can find either that there is adequate stacking space at the service bays to accommodate semis, or you could find that there is not. If you find there is not, then you might want to consider excluding tractor trailer service. There are no issues with utilities or drainage. And then This also goes to that same finding. You can either find that the existing drives, on-site circulation, and service bay stacking areas are adequate or not adequate to accommodate semis. So I think that is the primary focus of the hearing today, is just to clarify the operational model and get clarity as to how and where any semi-trucks that come for service would be accommodated, and where the designated areas are for employees to park, and how many employees we'd be trying to accommodate. So again, you have at your places this drawing provided as a supplement that was not in your packet that would help clarify that. And we have city staff, Tim Rogers from the Airport Authority, and a representative of Cross Midwest for any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Dean. Members of the commission have any questions for Dean before we? Seeing none, I think we'll go ahead and hear from the applicant. And if you have a presentation, fine, or if there's questions, however we want to do this.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am Tim Rogers, the Executive Director for the Salina Airport Authority, 3237 Arnold Avenue. And with me here today is Mike Goddard, who is the Service Manager for Cross Midwest of Salina. And I think probably if we can maybe address some of the questions here initially, and maybe start with the employee parking. The supplemental drawing that you do see here that I presented today shows the areas described for units F and G for customer parking, employee parking. There are 6 employees associated with this operation at the present time. And within this drawing, too, you see the stacking area for a tractor trailer. In your packet previously was the drawing showing the traffic flow for tractor trailers flowing in and out of the area on that site. Kind of getting back to Mr. Andrews' comments about the area and the character of the area, heavily trafficked with tractor trailer traffic along Arnold, Sutherland, General Jim Bailey. Located adjacent to this site is the Kansas Army National Guard's regional site for maintenance, training soldiers on the training of heavy equipment at that facility. To the south is the Kansas Army National Guard's cantonment area for the Regional Training Institute, of which heavy equipment is located. So the tractor trailer activity and the trucking activity is very prevalent in this area. Schwann's Trucking and Bradley Trucking having facilities within the airport industrial center within blocks of this facility too. The building, the Salina Development Center, was developed under the I-2 kind of design standards a number of years ago, but it is with the intent that there would be truck traffic in and out. In fact, just adjacent to units F and G on the south is a truck dock that can hold up to 3 tractor trailers at a time. If you were out there today, you would see 2 tractor trailers out there today and utilizing the facility as it was designed. There is in the paving around the building and to support the activity. The other tenants in the building, one, for example, GeoCore, again, using heavier equipment, heavier trucks, and in their drilling activity and for their environmental investigation business. Tire storage, and might have to have Mike come up here and correct me, but the concept and the switch and the change that Cross Midwest is doing has made. It's a change in business operations of really taking the repair activity out to their customer, maybe a construction company or trucking operator, and taking that, getting that work done on site. So minimal storage of tires at the facility, and generally the service personnel and the service truck is going out to their customer instead of the customer coming to the destination or to this location. The actual repair tractor trailer activity would be, again, preferred to be done on site at the customer's location, but occasionally a heavier vehicle up to tractor-trailer size would come to the site. The intent is to remove that wheel and that tire, bring that into units F and G for the repair there, and then take that and reinstall outside. Mike, that's correct? Because the facilities are not such to act as a service bay. So this is just that, occasion where a customer is coming by, I need a tire change, and so the quick pit stop activity outside the building. But if that vehicle is left for a period of time for any additional work, again, there is the stacking area identified to stack up to 2 tractor trailers at a time. I think those maybe are the items maybe to address the questions so you can finalize your findings, and I'll stop there to see if I've missed anything and stand for questions, Mr. Chairman.
Questions
Tim, this may be clear, but I want to be sure I understand. The stacking area you just mentioned, up to 2 at a time, is that outside the building or inside?
That is outside the building.
Okay.
And sorry to point,
Yeah.
and I wish we had gotten this earlier, units F and G are here, and the
Yeah.
stacking area is to the east of the building outside, and there's actually room for up to 3.
So up
Yeah.
on the screen, it would be
Yeah.
over in this.
Correct.
Okay.
And that is area that is leased to part of the lease with units F and G. That area runs with the lease as approved by the Airport Authority with Cross Midwest. So it's not a common use area. It is an area that is available for part of the Cross Midwest lease.
And then will the interior of the buildings be used primarily for tire storage?
No, it's going to be really for the repairs of any tires that come in that are repaired
Got it.
inside the shop.
Okay.
There is a limited amount of tire storage inside,
Yeah.
but I'm going to characterize, it's almost what is needed for that days or those work orders that are present. Again, stepping back, the change in the business model is not intended to have every tire available for every possible tire change. It's going to be more specific to the customers that they are working with as they have contracts with various customers, various trucking companies, various operators of large vehicles and industrial vehicles. So it'll be more specific to that specific need for a period of time.
So
Yes.
then are tires brought in from another location as needed? Am I getting that right?
Correct.
Yeah.
It's a just-in-time type of activity. And that's, they have the truck dock that they'll be receiving and shipping out the materials off the truck dock as they come in. Yes, sir.
Go ahead, Walt.
No, I was born in this tire business in 1938, so I kind of have a rough idea what this is like. I used to sell 1,500 tires at a time. I'm kind of questioning, you got a 53-foot rig. How you going to find the space for all that out there? I mean, and you say you'd only be there like 2 times a week or something like that, a tractor trailer will be in there? Because that's going to be kind of busy and tight, I think. Am I mistaken that? I mean, I'm just trying to picture, I was out there this morning.
Yes.
And driving around, I was trying to figure out where you put a 53-foot rig out there. That takes up a lot of space.
It does,
Real
but
quick.
that is the stacking area to bring that rig in and pull it in. The turning radiuses are noted on the previous exhibit. Those are tractor-trailer rigs, and the room is there. And we are making the changes. That area for that stacking has been cleared out, and it is available, part of the Cross Midwest lease. And those tractor trailers can move in and out of that area when needed.
Ken,
Tim,
you have a question?
judging from the aerial view that I have in front of me, it looks like both Sutherland and Arnold, the roads have an awful lot of, it looks like cobblestone. Are the roads in fairly good shape, or they just appear to be worse than they are? And the reason for the question is that going to be an issue with a little additional truck traffic? They should handle the additional traffic.
Sutherland, General Gym, and Arnold are city streets, and they are in very good condition and good repair. So they have been joint sealed as of late.
Okay.
So that They are, again, city staff and the streets department has been doing a great job in repair. But those roads, getting back to some of the history of the background for the airport industrial center, when we did the replat work, it was done at a time to also reconstruct the roads. So those roads were reconstructed to an industrial center standard, a depth to accommodate the truck traffic that is out there.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyone else? Any of the concerns I have are mitigated a great deal because I view a little bit of the airport authority as being the intermediary for the city of Salina. They run a pretty tight ship out there, and they look at the companies that come in and set up to do business there probably as hard as we do. And so I'm guessing, Tim, that you guys are happy to welcome this particular business to the cadre of businesses you have out there already.
Yes, and I think from the community perspective, it's the community being able to accommodate an existing business and retain the business and retain the jobs in our community so they can provide the service that's needed to so many manufacturers and contractors and operators of heavier trucks and heavier vehicles with a unique service where they will be again, this model has already been implemented, and UniFirst, a uniform company at the airport industrial center, for already seen Mike's service personnel on site, servicing those vehicles on site. So vehicles disabled, Mike's service crew are coming to that vehicle that needs the service, whether it's preventative, one of their preventative contracts, or to change a tire and get that vehicle up and running.
Okay, good. Does anybody, do we want to hear from, I'm sure you're the manager, is that correct? Do we need to hear from the manager? Anybody have any desire to? I have one kind of comment just I can't resist, in that in a previous life when I was teaching school and needing to drive a truck on weekends and summers to make the cash flow at my house, I knew what it's like to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and find out that your inside dual is flat. And it's nice to see a business model that says you pick up the phone, you call, and then somebody comes running and fixes it. I also know what it's like to limp into town with an inside dual that's flat and want to go home at the end of my drive and not have to take it out to a truck stop and sit there for 2 hours while it gets repaired. And I understand, from my little understanding, is what you're doing is you're saying, call us, we'll roll out there, fix you up, and get you going.
That's exactly what
Okay. And I think that's a real different model, and it's kind of exciting, very frankly.
I think the challenge for city staff, both for planning and zoning and also the fire marshal and the building official, is that we're fresh off a review of the Petrolube operation, and we were trying to apply the Petrolube operation to this setting, and they're not even close.
Not the same thing.
To the idea behind Petrolube is they're going to stock every type of over-the-road tire there is and have it available and stored and in stock, and they're going to try pull truckers directly off the interstate, and that is not this business model. So I appreciate Mr. Rogers coming here and clarifying the business operation model here, because I think that has been some of the challenge for staff, as we've been treating this as if it's going to operate the same as Petrolube when it's an entirely different business.
Well, I think if somebody has a contract with a trucking company, they're going to know exactly what kind of tires they have on those trucks. And as a company, they're going to want to have fewer varieties of tires also. And so I could see it real easily to say, I'm a driver for XYZ company, and they know exactly what kind of tire I need. So, if there are any other questions?
I don't have a question, but I do just have a comment which will have no bearing on my vote whatsoever. But I wanted to let Mr. Goddard know that I've been a loyal customer of Cross Midwest for many years in the automotive side, and just it was in a bit of grief when they dispensed with doing oil changes, so I could go in and get my oil changed at the same time. Questioned the business model. And now that you've gone to strictly truck, I just want you to know I appreciate you being there, but the depth of my grief at losing you and as an automotive customer has not led me to purchase an 18-wheeler.
This is I think we're done, Tim. Thank you very much.
Thank you very
Unless
much for considering it, and I do want to compliment staff for taking on, understanding the issue and helping us work this application through the process and bringing it to you for today's consideration. Thank you.
This is a public hearing, so if there's other members of the public who'd like to speak to this particular item, seeing none, we'll bring it back up here to the table for people to make some comments or entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion.
Go for it.
I move based on the findings of fact as presented to our committee and to include the staff recommendations as outlined on page 6 and 7 of our packet, that we approve application CU 15-2 as presented.
I second that.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the application. All in favor?
Aye.
Is there any discussion? Excuse me, is there any discussion? I couldn't tell. No? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Good luck.
What we'll do, Tim, is we'll send you a letter that formalizes today's action and 2 conditions of approval, and that letter will serve as your conditional use permit.
Item 5.2 is application Z 15-4, filed by the Salina City Planning Commission, requesting the amendment of Article 11 off-street parking and loading, Division 2, by amending Section 42-552E6 computation, and to add language that states when a structure or parcel is occupied by more than one use, the total requirement for providing off-street parking shall be the sum of the requirements for those uses computed separately. An amendment of Section 42-5533, other uses, to modify the off-street parking requirements for elementary schools, middle schools, and high schools, to base the parking requirement on the maximum designed capacity of the largest assembly space on the school grounds. If there is no assembly space on the school grounds, off-street parking would continue to be based on the number of employees, classrooms, and students. And this comes back to us from our discussion we had about 2 meetings ago. Dean?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a follow-up to discussions we had at a meeting where we discussed multiple text amendments, and these, I would not view them as dramatic changes so much as they are putting administrative interpretation and prior practice into and codifying those things. The original off-street parking regulations in the zoning ordinance were part of the original 1977 adoption, and then there was a comprehensive review and amendment of the surfacing requirements in 1990, and a comprehensive review of the individual numerical parking requirements in 1994, and so that has primarily remained as is since 1994. As we pointed out, prior to the 1977 ordinance, there was no off-street parking required for schools or churches. Off-street parking was considered optional or voluntary. So as a result, you can drive around the community and you'll find neighborhood churches that don't have a parking lot or any off-street parking, and you may see elementary schools that you may perceive as having a not enough parking. But as things have expanded and changed, particularly the 2000 bond issue expansions, the school district has not been required to go to an individual school and eliminate existing parking deficits. What has been applied is if there are classrooms or space added that would create a need for additional parking, only that incremental amount had to be added. There are 2 exceptions to that, and that's Cottonwood Elementary and Lakewood Middle School. Those were constructed as new facilities as part of the 2000 bond issue, and they were required to provide parking in accordance with the off-street parking requirements. What we have done historically is when we look at a property in the strip mall concept with multiple tenants, can be the most challenging, but if you're looking at shops at Meadow Point, which is on the east side of Ohio in front of Dillon's, where they have a bank and where they used to have Yogurtini, but they still have Jimmy John's, and you go across the street where there's a Papa John's restaurant and a chiropractic clinic and a hearing aid store. What we do when we look at that is that we look at those individual uses, and a chiropractic clinic has to provide so many spaces and a restaurant has to provide so many spaces, and we look at all those and then we total them together, so we are calculating the total parking based on the sum of the individual uses. What this proposed amendment does is just clarifies the calculation section to put practice into the actual code. And then the other aspect of that was looking back at the what was done with the Lakewood Middle School. When that was built, the number of parking spaces there was based on the size or capacity of the largest assembly space, which was the large gymnasium. And we did not include the secondary gymnasium. We did not incorporate the teachers and classrooms into the total off-street parking requirement. And the reasoning behind that was that if you have enough spaces to meet the largest assembly space, that would be more than adequate to meet all the other parking needs, because they're not likely to be utilized all at the same time. The problem with the current code is the way that it's written. It doesn't specifically read that way, and it could very well be interpreted to require that you stack those individual uses on top of each other, so that you would, if you looked at the large spectator gym and then you looked at the secondary gym at Lakewood and it has pull-out bleachers, and then you would look at classrooms and teachers, and you could come up with a number that is, in the 500 plus range if it was applied that way. And so what we have done in this proposed text amendment is that, if you could scroll up, John, is that what we would say is that if we add the provision or one space for each 3 persons or seats based on the maximum design seating capacity of any on-site auditorium, gymnasium, whichever has the largest capacity. In the case of middle schools and in the case of high schools, we add the term stadium there. But what you would do at and we've given you the examples there, at Lakewood, at South Middle, at Central High, at South High, rather than going in and saying, well, South High has a gymnasium, South High has an auditorium, and South High has this many students, and compiling those all on top of each other, that this would put into the zoning ordinance that what we're going to look at is whether it's the auditorium or whether it's the spectator gymnasium, whatever has the maximum seating capacity, that would be used to determine parking, and the individual uses, the classrooms, the number of faculty, the number of students would not be included. Then the caveat to that is, obviously we do have schools that don't have spectator gymnasiums or auditoriums, and so we would continue just to use the faculty member or number of classrooms to determine that requirement. But we see the biggest impact here being with the middle schools and high schools that may have spectator gymnasiums or may have auditoriums for assemblies or performances or things of that nature. So we think that this is realistic, and it's also potentially beneficial to school bond projects, because it clearly states that we're only going to focus on the seating capacity of the largest assembly space and not stack individual uses on top of each other. So that is our explanation for what that's trying to achieve. And so basically, if you've got a campus and you're providing space for the gymnasium or stadium grandstand or whatever is used to calculate that, that can be used to satisfy all or a portion of the above parking requirements. So that is the rationale. And as we looked at some of the bond projects coming forward, we thought this would be a useful clarification of the off-street parking code, so it would provide predictability and we wouldn't get differing interpretations.
Thank you. Questions?
Just a comment, we've talked on this commission before about overlay districts. This feels like an overlay parking requirement.
Overlay?
Makes, to me, however, it does make sense.
Well, the only question I would have is that it appears to be, and I understand it to be, the specific towards intermediate and secondary schools.
Yes.
Are there any other, as we put this in place, are there any other uses out there that would view this as an opportunity for them to provide less parking than would normally be, or in some cases to do away with some parking? For example, a bicentennial center or something like that has the big arena as well as the exhibition space. Would they find some niche in this that we didn't intend for?
The Bicentennial Center already has its historical niche that dates back to its 1979 construction, but it is correct that if we took what you would be doing, John, if you can scroll back up to, and again, what we're trying to avoid is that without this language, you need to keep going just a little farther, John. Without this language, then you could say that we're going to look at this, and we're going to look at South High School, and we're going to say, all right, you got an auditorium, you got a gymnasium, and so you're going to have to provide one space for each 3 persons based on the capacity of each of those, and then we're going to come down here, keep going, John, to the secondary schools, and then we're saying, plus you're going to provide one space for each faculty member and other employee, for one for each student. So if you looked at those as separate uses, then potentially you could stack those on top of each other. So the answer to that is that the Bicentennial Center has multiple assembly spaces, and they, based on the seating capacity of the arena, they do not have enough spaces over there today. So they are aware of that, but it's a grandfathering situation there, and the work that they're doing is actually reducing the seating capacity of the arena, not expanding it.
And I understand, and I on the surface am supportive of the ordinance change. Don't misunderstand that. I was just curious that we aren't doing something that, and I use the Bi Center because that's the first thing that I could think of, but I'm just looking out in the future, if somebody builds some venue that has multiple uses that could be used simultaneously, will that yet to be built entity come back to this amendment and say, is there a way that we can avoid having adequate parking?
Well,
if the answer is no, then I'm fine.
They can go to this to look at it as they'd like to have something similar, but they would have to initiate that at the time, because the only 2 sections that are being touched deal directly with primary and intermediate schools and secondary schools. So this doesn't apply to colleges and universities. It doesn't apply to the Bicentennial Center. But if they had a similar situation or potential conflict and they wanted to take a similar approach, I think we would look at it along these same lines. But this is something that we tried to anticipate and get out ahead of in terms of the school bond projects. I guess the only other example I'd give you is that we just, on Friday, issued a certificate of occupancy for the Holiday Inn. Holiday Inn has rooms that people rent and stay in. They have meeting space, and they have a restaurant. And they have to provide parking for so many for the motel room, so many for the meeting space, so many for the restaurant, but they get if you have them all under one roof, there is a reduction in the required amount because they are under one roof. So we could possibly take that approach to but that is, again, that's specifically in the code for hotels and convention centers.
You know, I think it's important here to state, too, that if you look at reasonably the way schools operate, rarely would you ever have a situation where you have an auditorium and a gymnasium and a stadium being used at the same time, maximum capacity. I mean, historically, schools don't schedule that way.
Right. Or
And so it'd be a little waste of green space to accommodate parking for all those areas that are used typically one at a time. So this makes some real logical sense. However, I would say that as new schools are built, it's certainly advisable today to look at enough space when you build them, and while we're not building any new ones with this bond issue, it's advisable to look for enough space to have adequate parking, especially for elementary schools and those type of areas that are oftentimes put in pretty small areas. So I think it's a good change.
Any other questions for staff? It's a public hearing. Any members of the public like to address this? Seeing none, bring it back to the commission for potential action.
You know, at the risk of appearing dumb, my dad used to say it's better to keep your mouth shut and look stupid than to open it and remove all doubt. But I understand the sections that are below, specifically about primary, intermediate school, secondary, and so forth. But when I read the one that's on the screen now, at the top, so I'll just read it. In the event several uses occupy a single structure or parcel of land, the total requirements for off-street parking shall be the sum of the requirements of the several uses computed separately. As I read that, it sounds like the intent of that is almost the exact opposite of what I'm hearing talked about, that each requirement, this is going to require 400 spaces, this will require 300, and this will require 5. So you add 400, 300 to 700 plus 5 is 1,200, so you have more spaces, not fewer. I'm just asking about the way it's phrased. Is that accurate for what our intent is?
It is accurate for what the intent would be for every other use except for schools. And that is the reason for the specific text amendment for schools, because the upper language is being done in, so let's take the Holiday Inn on South 9th Street.
And that was your earlier example,
several uses
yeah.
occupy a single structure. We have a hotel, we have a Burger Theory restaurant, and we have convention and meeting space. So we have 3 different uses that occupy a single structure. There's an off-street parking requirement. The restaurant has 107 seats.
Okay.
So that has a requirement for parking. The convention space has a requirement for parking and the number of rooms of the hotel. So we're going to take the hotel rooms plus the restaurant plus the meeting rooms computed separately, then we're going to sum those together, and that's the total requirement. So that is the general rule, and then this text amendment that we're talking about below for schools is a specific exception
I see.
to that rule.
Okay, and that was your earlier example, Dean.
Yes.
I think I
So
understand
we
that.
are doing this text amendment to
Yeah.
specifically create an exception to the above rule.
And I don't want to extend this unnecessarily, but I'm curious, has there been any objection of the hotel, for example, hotel, convention center, restaurant, about having to meet that larger parking requirement? Because they might argue that not all those spaces are filled usually at any one time.
We have not It's something that has worked quite well with the former Holiday Inn Holidome, and we've had discussions with others. We've tended to have most of the motels that have been built recently haven't had much meeting space and haven't had restaurants. But the restaurant within Holiday Inn isn't open to the public. Anybody can come there and eat, so the parking for that, I mean, the parking requirement out there is 185 spaces, and they have provided 200 spaces in their design. So it was not difficult for them to meet that, but schools are a different story.
Other questions or discussion up here? Don't want to hurry anybody. If not, I think I'd be looking for a motion.
I would make a motion that we approve adoption of the proposed amendments to Section 42-552 E6 and Section 42-553 3 E and G as given to us by the staff.
I'll second that motion.
It's been moved and seconded to adopt the proposed amendments. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Administrative item 6.1.
I don't want to belabor
No, that's
anything
fine.
on that. It speaks for itself. I had a discussion with Mr. Wilson. He firmly believed that Caw Valley would get something into us early last week, and as of the time we put the agenda to bed, we had not received it, so we think the appropriate action would be to
Withdraw,
continue
yeah.
that to the first meeting in May to allow
Okay.
for that.
I was thinking, how about we continue that to the first meeting when the drainage study is presented? That way we don't have to put it on here every time.
Well, anytime you postpone something, you have to go to a date certain, so.
Okay. Sorry for asking.
There needs a motion and a second, I
It
see.
does need a motion
Okay.
and second to postpone item P15-1 to the May meeting.
Okay, I move that we postpone issue or application number P15-1/1A to the, would it be the
May 5th.
May 5th meeting?
It's been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor? I think Mr. Story did the second. Is there any discussion? Then all in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Other matters?
Just have one other matter for you. We've got it, clarification. I think both Crystal and I were informed or attempt to be reminded from the clerk's office that with Mr. Ryan moving to the city commission that we needed to find a new vice chairman, but we don't because we already have one. But what we do want you to consider, and it can be done at your May meeting, but Mr. Ryan served as your liaison to the Board of Zoning Appeals, which meets on the third Thursday of each month, and he is off the Planning Commission. He's also off the Board of Zoning Appeals. So if any of you would want to step forward at the May meeting and say that you would like to serve as the liaison to the Board of Zoning Appeals, we'll accept volunteers for that. Mr. Kennedy is serving as your Heritage Commission liaison, and Mr. Ryan was your Board of Zoning Appeals liaison, and so Mr. Ryan needs a replacement. We do have one vacancy on the Planning Commission now, and there's half a dozen, I think, expression of interest forms in the clerk's office that will be forwarded to the mayor and city commission to consider a replacement.
Would it be helpful for folks to have, and whether we want to do it today or you could send it out, just a brief overview of what it is that the Board of Zoning Appeals does? That might help people
We
in
can-
terms of making a decision rather than somebody raising their hand
Yeah,
at
I
this
think we
time
can
without,
find a description that we can email out to all the planning commissioners.
and then we can dispense with that
Yeah.
At our next meeting, if that's soon enough?
Yeah.
Okay.
At our next meeting, we'll have the item carried over on Mr. Wilson. We also have it's going to be a discussion and get guidance on. We have a situation where the Webster Conference Center has a failing septic system for their cafeteria and residents there. The state of Kansas and the county sanitarian will not allow that septic to be put back in function because it's in the Mulberry Creek floodway. So they're seeking the ability to connect to the city's sanitary sewer system. And we have a policy that says if you want to receive sewer service, you must be annexed. But we're not sure that it's desirable to annex the entire complex or a portion of it. So they have filed an application seeking annexation of their conference center site just to get the discussion started on how they could potentially be served. And so the city commission has requested that the planning commission review that, get a report from staff, and provide your guidance or recommendation on whether we want to bring that into the city or not. It is north of I-70 on the west side of North Ohio. And it was developed in the county, and it was developed prior to our current floodplain regulations. Probably if it was done in the 90s, it wouldn't be there because of its proximity to the Salina River and Mulberry Creek. But it's there, and the KDHE takes a very dim view of septic fields in a floodway. So we'll have a staff report and lay out comp plan and floodplain regulations and fire protection and all those things, and you can provide us your advisory opinion on that.
Okay. One other item before we adjourn, unless somebody else has one.
I have one other, but go ahead.
No, go ahead. That's fine. I'd like to end with
I was
this.
just going to ask, we talked last time about the permitted uses and reviewing those within each of the zoning districts, and I wondered if there was a date that the staff was intending to have that list to us to review.
What we will do is probably give that to you at your next meeting. One of the things that we're going to have to do is, because you recommended amending every single one of our commercial districts to add a catch-all provision at the end, when, in order for that text amendment to get in front of the City Commission, we're going to have to retype the C1, C2, C3, C4, C5, C6, C7 district regulations, and in doing that, we'll have a perfect list to distribute to you. So what will happen is that we will give it to you with a homework item to study it, and then we'll actually schedule it on your agenda to get your feedback. But we'll get it into your hands so that you can read through and get familiar with each of the districts and the listed uses. And then once you have that, we'll have an agreed upon agenda date when that will come back for discussion.
Dina, do you mean, you talked about retyping on those, is that not available in an electronic form for copy and paste?
It is in a PDF form, which is not editable, and so that's a challenge. We can certainly get you that in a PDF format. That's not difficult. What we have to do when we create an ordinance, such as a Word document, we got to take the PDF and translate it into a Word document. So
Nothing that the software geniuses can do anything about?
no, but we can certainly get you printed copies of C1 through C7, which we can hand out to you at your next meeting.
I was not intending to make additional work for the staff. My apologies.
Well,
we have to do it anyway. So
This is a
we're-
perfect time to bring up the last item then.
Agreed.
Those of you who aren't aware, you should be, and those of you who have somebody like this, you need to be paying attention. This week is Administrative Professionals Week. Specifically, tomorrow is Administrative Professionals Day, and I'd like to ask this body to join me in congratulating and thanking Crystal for the hours and hours she does to get things ready for us. Good job, lady.
Her reward is that she gets to go to a leadership conference on Thursday.
We are adjourned.
And she's pumped.
Yeah, right. Hallelujah, get out of here.